Welcome to this episode of the Today Dreamer podcast. We're going to be exploring effective choice making together with one another in this space, right here, right now. Welcome to the present moment, and I'm happy to be here with you. Today's guest is Forrest Landry, and Forrest is the founder and CEO of Magic Flightbox, a company among the first to introduce the portable vaporizer to the world. Forrest Landry is a philosopher, writer, researcher, scientist, engineer, craftsman, and teacher who has been studying and practicing the varied high arts since the mid-70s. So, if you're new to the show, the Today Dreamer podcast is here to allow us to explore what deepening the practice of presence looks like within our own lives by gathering the perspectives of others that are doing the same thing. Looking at dreaming, doing, and integrating those two into being. And you might think, what does the CEO of a company that was the first to introduce, or one of the first to introduce portable vaporizers have to do with presence? Well, Forrest is a remarkable human. I would like to tell you a short story before we begin. I was in the market for a marijuana vaporizer, probably about, 5 or so years ago, maybe more, because I was looking for, at the time, a healthier way to ingest marijuana, because I could tell that it just wasn't good for my lungs. When I used to smoke, and I came across this cute little box made of wood, and on the back of the box there was a message that said something like, always make choices from a place of love and not fear. Love is always stronger than fear, something like that. And I really remember feeling just this remarkable feeling inside that something so true was on the back of this little box. And I went traveling for a few years, and on my journey this message kept coming up every time I had met a difficult fork in the road in terms of having to make a decision. And I decided to go with love every time I noticed it and reflected upon the message. And this has really changed my life. It was kind of decision making from a place other than the mind. It's like decision making of the heart. And I got back and I came across Forrest's work, and I wanted to get him on to the show because, what he's done and how he's helped me, I'm sure that can kind of filter out to others in the sphere. It's such a beautiful thing to consider. His work, I feel, is 100 years ahead of its time. And it's surprising that, people are connecting with it now, but he's done some amazing work. He's done TED Talks and written books and done a lot of work into choice making. So today we're going to explore some of that, and we're going to see what we uncover. If you're enjoying the episodes, if you're enjoying the show and you'd like to find a way to support the show, the best way to support these mindful media vibes that I'm sending out every week into the sphere, into your eardrums, and if they're resonating, please consider sharing the show with others. But the best way to support the show is to become part of the Today Dreamer tribe. And you can do that by heading over to patreon.com/todaydreamer, where you've got the opportunity to support the show, and in exchange I provide gifts and perks to everyone that becomes part of the Today Dreamer family. So please head over to patreon.com/todaydreamer if you're interested in, deepening that connection. I'd really appreciate it. Help keep the show alive and help keep this intention burning. So let's take a moment to take a deep breath together, come into a moment of pause, a moment of stillness amongst the chaos of our lives, and drop into kind of a shared space a little bit deeper together now before moving into the conversation. So I'd just like to invite you to find a comfortable position. It can be wherever you are at the moment, or you can find a seat on the floor or on a chair. You can even lay down if it feels right. And when you're ready, bring your eyelids to a gentle close. Take one big inhale in and exhale out. Into the nose, deep into the belly. And release. Now let's do that again, but this time, see if you can make your inhale as slow as naturally possible. And whenever it is that you reach the peak, take your time with it and just pause there for a moment. Feel into that space before exhaling just as gracefully on the way out and pausing at the bottom. Here's a conversation with Forrest. That message that you wrote on that little box I really just kind of upon reflection and just in preparation for this conversation, it's just made such a difference in my life. You know, it's interesting when we think about the little things that really change our trajectory and how the decisions that we make can really take us in, you know, a lot of different directions. And just looking at the significance of certain moments, it's an interesting thing. But definitely that box and that message on that box has stayed with me. When I read it, there was something that really rang true about it. I didn't know what it was. It felt like the right thing, you know. I didn't know why, I didn't know how, but it just made sense. And it stuck with me. I mean, it really did. And now kind of looking kind of over your work, it makes sense that you wrote it on the box. I didn't know who wrote it on the box at the time. I just thought, you know, what's this about? Because you don't really see something that strikes you as that real on a product, and that really cuts through that much. And
I'm super glad to hear all this.
Yeah, well, it's something that it's just, yeah, it's something that's really, I've noticed, changed the way that I make decisions now, if I'm going to be honest. And it's really, you know, it was a seed. All it was a seed that was planted. That's really grown into something now that has been really useful in my life, through difficult moments, very, very difficult moments, and a lot of struggle. That message has come through. And it's been confusing at times, you know, sometimes, just for everyone. I don't know if anyone's listening at the moment, but for everyone listening, the message was something like, choose love over fear. Always choose love over fear. And, you know, sometimes I was questioning in my life, you know, it seems like fear creeps in both directions of the choice, you know, when you've got two kind of options. But then it's like, well, you don't want to be basing your decisions on fear. And even if it's a struggle to find yourself coming to the more difficult one, which is often love, like it's not easy to make a choice that's kind of against what your mind is telling you or screaming at you, and coming from somewhere that's a bit more within and like more of a felt sense. It's a difficult thing, but it's almost like that push to step over that obstacle is always worth it in the end. And that's, for me, that's been recognized by a real sense of, and I wasn't sure in the beginning if it was a sense of relief for having made the decision, or just this feeling of just going like things are on the right track, and I'm moving in the right direction because I've made the decision based on love. So I'm not sure if any of that makes sense, but
No, it all makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's actually just, I mean, I can talk about what that statement is and what it means and why I put it on there. I can, connect the dots, because what you're describing to me sounds right. I mean, what I hoped for was what you're describing, to have created the capacity for people to really improve their lives. I mean, that was the reason I put it on, very specifically. I mean, if you look at my website, I have a couple. I have mflb.com, which is where I'm posting a lot of stuff these days. There's an older one, uvsm.com, but basically MFLB has all my recent work, including that other one. And so, if you look at it, you'll see there's an enormous amount of stuff that I've written and time that I've spent doing writing and things. And, I was really thinking about, well, what does this all boil down to? Like, what is the one thing I can say to somebody? And just know that if they didn't understand anything else I said, but if they really got this one piece, that it would really help to make a difference. And, this was back before the whole Silicon Valley cliche of make the world a better place. This was my actual attempt to do that, not the cliche version, but just the genuine sense of, if I'm going to suggest a concept or an idea that I know to be the case, that I can believe in, and that I know that other people can believe in, what's the simplest and most succinct statement of that I can come up with? And so the aphorism, love is that which enables choice. Love is always love is always stronger than fear. Always choose on the basis of love. That's been printed on pretty much every single one. I mean, we literally, all of the units that we've ever made and shipped, that message is on it. And it's essentially it's three parts. Obviously, the first part is a kind of definition. The second one is a kind of theorem. And the third one, as you know, is an injunction, right? It's a what to do. So, I basically the notion here is that everybody in the world is going to have relationships. None of us is by ourselves. We're born into families. We have friendships and work partnerships and so on. And then, eventually we pass, but the legacy that we have is in our relationships. And so in this sense, the idea is that if those relationships are going to be healthy, if they're going to be real, if they're going to be generative in some sense, have a future, then we really need to get this practice right. The practice of, how do we care for one another? How do we love one another? What does that mean? And so the idea is of love is that which enables choice, is something that for me clarified what the action of love was. I mean, there's so much poetry out there about what does it feel to be in love, right? And that's a very self-oriented point of view. But if I'm trying to figure out how to be loving towards another person, then now this notion is a guideline. I want to enable their choices. I want them to have a chance to discover the wonder and the value of life, to become more fully themselves. If I'm going to say I love them for some notion of knowing who they are, then the sense of enabling them to choose, as there's a sense by which we become more ourselves through our choices. There's another aphorism in the system, which is self is the product of all the choices you have made and all the choices you could make. It's both, right? So in other words, I am partly infused by all of the experiences that have made me who I am today, all of the choices I've made in the past that have led me to this moment. And at the same time, being who I am, whatever wisdom I have, whatever skills, things I've learned in life that I could apply, that I could enact by making things or writing or teaching or whatever it is that I choose to do, that those skills inform all of my future capacities. If I know about botany, I'm going to be able to make, healthy plants. If I know about cooking, then I'm going to be able to make good food, whatever that means, right? Having some notion of even what goodness is a skill. And so in effect, there's a there's a real sense that by enabling a person to choose well, to choose wisely, to know what their choices are, know what their values are, know what their basis of being is, then, to affirm that, to essentially say, how can I help? What are the things that I can do that would enable you to choose well and wisely and fully, and to become more yourself, so that by being more yourself, that I can even more fall more deeply in love with you.
Mm.
And so this sense of love is that which enables choice has now become a really discerning test. It's like, am I just enabling my own choices? Am I trying to supplant their choices? That wouldn't be genuine love, right? If I'm trying to replace their choices with my choices for my benefit, then that's not loving. And so, and right away we can start to see these kind of distinctions, right? I mean, it's obvious as soon as you think about it that way. And then, we can use it as a kind of as a tool to see whether or not someone else is acting in a loving way towards us, right? Like, I might be in a relationship with a narcissist or an abusive person, and think that they're being loving to me. But if I ask the question, are they enabling me to be alive? Are they enabling me to be healthier, more myself? Are they affirming my capacity to choose my sovereign dignity and right to live and all that sort of stuff? Or are they, covertly preventing me from making good choices? They're trying to displace which choices I can make. It's a bit like if I go into a auto dealership and he says my choice is the red car or the blue one, and he sort of tries to implicitly convince me that it's not my choice as to whether or not to buy a car, but just which one is going to be, right? Or whether or not to just leave and go not buy a car at all, or go to the other dealership, or just not be coerced into thinking that the options are just the ones that he gives me. And so, when we're looking at software, we're looking at politics, for example, it's like, what's not on the menu, right? I have two candidates, which neither one of them I really like, right? There's so many times. How many times have you had to vote for a candidate? I'm not speaking, about any particular election, recent or even in the past. I'm just simply saying that a lot of times it's like the values that we want to see expressed, nobody's representing that.
Mm.
And so, in a sense, there's a real need here for us to recognize when it is important to know when to abstain, or when to be in a relationship that is different than the one we're currently in, because the skillfulness of loving one another hasn't been established. And so, in other words, if someone else is trying to condition my choice by taking options away, or to constrain my capacity to choose, then I'm going to want to think very carefully as to whether that relationship is genuinely a healthy one.
Mm.
And so, these are now tools that show up in friendships and romantic partnerships, but they also show up, as I said, in politics, where the relationship between um, the government and the people. If the function of government is to protect the land and the people, it is to enable those people to choose well and wisely, to thrive as a result of the choices that they make, that the land becomes healthier, that it fulfills the capacity to support life, to be productive, for farms or wildlife or whatever else it is that means thriving, is a sense that it has the choice to have a future,
Mhm.
right? And we can extend this even to the relationship between individual people and systems, software, for example. I mentioned the thing about the menu. Does the software actually enable a person to do the things they need to do, rather than the things that some big company, the big five firms, want you to do certain things a certain way? They take out certain options and they make things opt out rather than opt in, and all the sort of dark patterns about how software can be used to manipulate human behavior.
Mm. Yeah,
And so,
it seems like there's quite a, I guess we're all going a certain way, following the stream of things. I'm trying to kind of put this in words the best I can. And I've noticed with the decisions that have gone against that, and gone for a different option that may not be on the menu, there's almost a sense of, it's more than, it's like a glitch in my system of being, like a kind of a struggle to kind of step out of the kind of, given the presented options that I'm used to, going down those paths, and kind of finding a new way through the forest, I guess. And
Yeah.
it's been, it's almost, it hasn't even made any sense to my mind. And I remember feeling like the first time that this happened, you know, afterwards it was like, oh, that was the best thing I could have done. And this is, I can't believe I actually made that step. But during the process of making that decision, there was this real glitch between like my mind was trying to like tell me that, from an analytical sense, that this wasn't the right way to go. And there was this almost a sense of dropping into the gut or the heart or the body. It was like an embodied decision, and a sense of trust and curiosity and experimentation that took place to be able to step into these decisions that just seemed like crazy to my mind but felt right. So there's this, and it's the same thing, like if you're at a car dealership and he's saying, do you want the red car or the blue car, and it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
To be able to walk away, even though your mind's telling you, that's been sucked in by this illusion of choice that he's created. It's almost the idea of going with what you feel. It's like a sense of intuition. And I was thinking about an example this morning, just of like some dodgy situations I've been in while traveling, and just this kind of idea of just walking away from it, and how much trouble I would have saved myself. I did save myself. Instead of kind of going down the wrong road, it could have easily turned into like some sour situation many times. And that applies to different areas in our life. But I guess it comes down to what I'm interested in exploring is, recognizing those moments. And even, for people that aren't used to making those kinds of decisions, how do they get started with them? How do they kind of, because it seems like it builds and it becomes easier as you go. So once you start making these decisions, you've kind of already figured out the pathway to do so, and then they become easier and easier. But the first one's a real, like I said, like a real struggle, a real glitch in the system.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts on kind of those first steps, or like a way into making more effective decisions based on a sense of feeling, or however you would describe it in the context of your work?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's the right question, which is, how do we integrate a kind of sensory awareness, an embodied awareness? And you're right. It is a kind of feeling based process. It starts there. It wants to start there. We have first impressions, and we have intuitions, and we have feelings, and they represent a kind of embodied awareness. Like our whole experience of life is present in every moment. It infuses the matrix of our being. I mean, we can get to learn to trust our feelings, and we don't have to just stay there. I mean, obviously, if we start with the intellect process, we can lose track of the feelings. We can lead ourselves astray. The intellect can be deceived. So in effect, what we do is we use the feelings as a way to increase our discernment. The intellect is going to operate from a place of judgment. It's going to try to figure out a simple, easy answer, right? But a lot of cases, what we're really looking to do is to be more discerning. So we want to start with the feeling, and then as we explore what is the meaning of the feeling, then we begin to also bring our intellect back into it. But you don't want to start with the intellect. The intellect has nowhere to go. It's like a race car, but no direction. It doesn't matter how fast the car is, how powerful the engine, whether or not it's designed fuel efficiently, or has brilliant colors on racing stripes on the side, and so on and so forth. If the car is driving into a cliff or off of one, it doesn't matter whether or not the driver has a PhD. Somewhere along the way, there has to be guidance. There has to be a kind of sense of direction, and the feeling, the value systems, the underlying basis of choice that is embodied in a kind of built-in physical wisdom gives us that guidance, right? It's a sense in which we we have a direction that we want to go in, and that direction is infused with some sort of meaningfulness that is maybe something we don't appreciate right away or know right away. We have to then use that feeling to inform our thinking, to basically say, okay, I trust that I'm feeling something, and that the fact that I'm feeling something is important. There's signal here.
Mm-hmm.
And so in effect, we want to then start to use our imagination, right? It's not necessarily an intellectual facility, but it can become that. So we have this feeling, and then we start to imagine various scenarios. Am I feeling this way because maybe I'm worried that, and you fill in the blank, right? Or maybe I'm reminded of some traumatic experience or something like that. So you start to try these different hypotheses, and you compare how that imagination makes you feel versus how you feel, and you make that comparison, and then you start to develop a kind of narrative as to why you feel that way, right? So it's like it's taking an unconscious, I don't know why I feel this way, and converting it into one that is conscious. And so in effect, there's three parts. There's this imaginative facility, there's the feelings that it's translating, and then this sort of intellectual narrative as to what those feelings mean. And when we get
then
those,
the follow through.
yeah. So in other words, the idea is that if I can, I have enough flexibility of imagination. I've worked with this exercise enough that I start to become really good at noticing when I have a feeling, figuring out what that feeling means by, maybe I talk to it, like with people, this is kind of stereotypical, but women talk to one another, right? Men should too, right? We want to say, well, I'm feeling this, or I'm thinking that, or so on and so forth, and then compare how the statement makes them feel relative to what it was the original feeling. So if I say, hey, I feel sad, I can start to notice whether that feels consistent or not, right? So I might say, well, actually, that's not quite right. I feel a little, I feel a little depressed and partly anxious, and I think the reason is because of this. And then I now have another hypothesis, and then I say, nope, that's not quite right either. It's actually because of, and so in effect, we're fine tuning our ability to be aware of the nuances of our feeling. It's like we're engaging more deeply. We're getting more present and more embodied and more in touch. And with that capacity, we gain an intellectual capacity to have a connection between what we're feeling, what our intuition is, and what our intellect can tell us. That's when things really start to work well, right? It's if I just have the intellect and no imagination, I'm not even going to think of things that might be options that are worthwhile. As you mentioned a minute ago, sometimes it's, okay, something's not quite right. Stop, look, and tell the truth, right? Or just stop and just look around and try to figure out, okay, what are the feelings that I'm having? What are the imagined scenarios that are maybe concerns? And how do I construct a new alternative, a new choice? So this capacity to choose well and wisely is going to be based on our capacity to have discernment rather than judgment. It's creating the options that are the right options, the ones that are win-win, the ones that are genuinely based upon our values rather than some projection.
Mm-hmm. It seems as though we can be quite desensitized to this whole process, and it might even need some kind of a snapping into, like some abrupt experience or something to really, I guess, shake us out of being in a certain way that we've been used to being for so long.
Well, Gurdjieff talked about this a bit. A long while ago, there was a teacher, I don't know if you know that name, but he was a kind of a character. And one of the things that he would do as part of his teaching would be to break people out of their ruts, right? So he would do a kind of antinomian thing where he would, create pattern interrupts. People would be in patterns, they'd be in habitual behavior. And he would notice that, and he would basically say, well, he would introduce something that would interrupt the pattern, some sort of surprising element that person then had to sort of integrate and react to, and to now all of a sudden have to stop and and have a new behavior in a space that wasn't a habit that had previously existed. And then there was this notion that was, again, part of a philosophy or idea here of how to become more conscious of one's patterns. So in effect, there's this idea of an observer self, right? There's myself that's participating, and then there's the part of me that is watching me go through my life and is looking for where are these patterns and evaluating them. It's a kind of thing of, is this pattern, this habit that I'm in, is this actually still well adapted to my current circumstances? Is there something about myself to which I have previously been blind that I need to uh, reinvest choice in to change the pattern so that I can be more appropriately adapted to the circumstances I'm actually presently in?
Yeah.
So there's an exercise of essentially trying to identify one's blind spots and to heal those.
There's this piece I've been focused on, and I think I just came to the realization that it may have been not the right way, or not the right space to be focusing in on. So the podcast that I do here is I'm trying to kind of, I guess, speak to people around different. It began with the idea of spaciousness and stillness, where we can, then take some meaningful action from, and, the modalities that lead us into that space, the insights that may arise once we're there, and then how do we actually move into some phase of action. But it seems like from what you're saying, because you mentioned those three pieces earlier, but you didn't actually mention that follow through, that movement into the action. But it seems like that is almost like an automatic thing that takes place once we have all the other elements in place.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
it flows easily. Once you basically have a win-win choice, a clear, this is going to be responsive to all of the needs, right?
Yeah.
My needs, your needs, everybody's needs. Then it's easy. It's like there's no conflict. There's just enthusiasm. And so the energy, of course, is going to flow. We're just going to do the right thing because there's a sense here by which we've really gotten clarity about what is goodness, what is rightness in this case. We've gotten the love right, basically. And so in that sense, the action part, the choice part, just becomes obvious. It becomes easy. It's not going to, I'm not basically saying that all of life can be kumbaya, just like some sort of utopian perfection, but that
it's not what we would want anyways, right?
Well, I don't know that perfection is necessarily an ideal state either, but I think that what we're really getting to is a kind of natural flow. I think of Zen as a the way, right? What is the way? The way of flow, the way of organic relationship, the right relationship, a Native American concept. The notion here is that if we can sense truly what is truth, right, where we can perceive with all of ourselves, and we accept our perceptions. There's no conflict. We integrate the full sense of our feeling, our full sense of imagination, our full sense of intellect, and that becomes essentially the organic reception. I have received fully, without judgment, that I can now respond fully without hesitation. So there's a kind of mastery involved with that. It's like if I can perceive, like if we're talking a sort of martial arts scenario, somebody's you're sparring with somebody in a a judo situation, perhaps.
I'm liking these examples.
Yeah, it's fun, right? So you have, I mean, sparring is actually a beautiful thing. It's like a dance that has just enough rules to make it so that there's actual real skill involved. And enough freedom so that there's real surprise, and there's a kind of interactiveness that you can think of a sparring match as being a little bit like a game of chess, but real time and involving one's whole self rather than just one's intellect. And so in a sense, there's a deep beauty with that. And we don't necessarily, when we're in a sparring situation, or even an actual conflict, hopefully that's not a scenario you find yourself in, but that person's throwing a punch at you, you're not saying, oh, woe is me, why are they doing this, right? That intellectual construct would just get in the way. You have to actually deal with the situation right then and there. Any hesitation to try to basically have evaluativeness about the whyness of it is not going to let you spend as much time processing the what of what is happening.
Seems that the lead up to that, though, and this idea of practicing a certain craft or developing a skill set, the training element, when it comes to that match with the opponent, that's when it all kind of comes into play. Do you have any ideas on like any specific practical ways to begin to develop that other than what we've spoken about? Any maybe techniques or tools to kind of get that training in order, so that when that match arrives, I'm sure it constantly does in our life, and there's this sense of things are obviously always changing, and the moment to moment decisions are really the ones that are building our life together, and acting now is from that place would be the best thing to do. And it's not like the match is some faraway place, but difficult decisions, some choices seem more difficult than others and more significant than others, although they all seem to be significant. Is there any way to kind of jump on that training ring and begin kind of practicing a way to prepare ourselves for these moments that just arise?
Well, I think there's some things for sure that come to mind. I mean, obviously, if I want to be able to respond with my whole self, I need to know my whole self, right? So, when we respond as an integrated being, we can be very effective. Like if all of me is moving together, I can be, again, without inhibition or without barrier, right? But to get to that state, we need to know our whole self. So there's it's ancient. We know it is coming from the Greeks of know thyself. There's a kind of meditation element to this. So, when we are thinking about what sort of exercises would prepare a person to notice what they are feeling, right? When I think about meditation, I think of it as a practice, which, a lot of people will talk about it in the sense of stopping thinking, right? To have the monkey mind, the commentary that's going on and on, to just stop. But to me, trying to stop something is that's only part of it. It's what you start that is also important. And in effect, it's not so much that the emphasis here is to stop thinking, although that can be very helpful. It is to really get aware of what I'm feeling. So if I'm in a meditation practice, I'm whether it be a walking meditation or a sitting one, or eyes open or eyes closed, I might have a thought, and I might have the exercise of putting the thought up on a shelf or putting it on a leaf and letting it float away in the water. There's all sorts of visualization exercises a person can do, but the element here is to descend into the state of an awareness of the totality of self. It's like a complete awareness of everything that you're feeling. And, at first it might be, oh, I didn't know I had a pain in that particular toe, or it might be, oh my God, I itch everywhere. And there could be any number of distractions that come up. But the idea here is that, over time, you'll begin to become more and more aware of all of the things that you're feeling in that moment. You'll become attuned to your own sensory capacities, your own sensory state. And the more that you can become discerning about that sensory capacity and that sensory state at all levels, I could say emotional, but we're really talking about feelings. We're talking about, not just physical proprioceptive, sensations in one bodies, but essentially the sensation of what it is to be you within the totality of your own conscious being. Everything that we experience in life is going to have an effect on us. Every person that we hang out with, how I am with my parents is going to be different than how I am with my friends or with my boss. So we each influence one another's feeling state. Everybody, the plants that are around you that I can see in your thing influence you. They change the shape of how the space that you're in feels. The color of the walls, the items that you pick and choose to put on your shelves, every little thing is going to affect the way in which the room feels and the way in which the room affects you as a person in it. So when we become more aware of our natural feeling state and we come into different spaces, we can begin to notice how those spaces affect us. We can begin to notice how different people affect us. And that gives us a much more fine-tuned awareness to begin the process of imagination and intellect integration.
Yeah.
So in a, so in effect, it's on one hand, we're becoming more aware of our feelings so that we can become more aware of what feelings are changing. And then we can notice the changes.
Yeah.
And so there's a baseline awareness, and there's all sorts of exercises about this, going on walkabout, for example, and experiencing a very wide variety of things and taking nothing with you, and essentially being in a place that you've never been and don't know, and then changing those rapidly, that we can begin to see what is our natural repose despite all the world around us changing. We randomize the world so that we can find the consistency, which is ourselves. And we therefore now know what is ours and what is not ours, what is ourself and what is other. And in that capacity, so again, these are all different sort of flavors of what is meant by meditation or practices that would be generative of this. And then you even notice, for example, that, as I was describing earlier, that in order to let the thoughts go, I might imagine a visualized scenario of putting my thought on a leaf and letting it float away down the stream, right? So I have to imagine a water flow. I have to imagine that there are leaves and my thoughts can be made into little crystals or something and put on those leaves, and off they go, right? So in effect, the idea here is that not only is it the case that I become more aware of my feeling, but I'm also starting to explore and to develop the capacity for imagination. So that would be the next piece, right? So, there's physical exercises to improve one's health so that one can respond as a whole being. There's the sensory, become aware of one's feelings as much as one is already aware of one's thinking, right? Most thinkings are easier. Thinking is an object, but feeling has to do with a subject. It's not a thing. We don't have very many words that are very good at holding feelings. I mean, there's a whole range of them, but if you've ever tried to write down a dream, the nuances of the dream that you have when you wake up and what you can write down on a piece of paper, very different things. And so, in a sense, there's this becoming more conscious of one's feelings, and then there is the increase in the variety and flexibility, and literally just the nuance of capacity in one's imagination.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't imagine a solution to a problem, then it's not that the problem is insolvable. It's that I might actually just lack the skill of imagining a solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, we want to develop good flexibility of the imagination. So now we have a physical component, health component, so to speak, a feeling component, and an imagination component. Obviously, having some skills as an intellectual person can certainly help. Lots of tools there. That part is probably the easiest, so I don't need to mention that quite as much. But the other thing too, like I said, is this sort of ongoing practice of noticing one's blind spots, noticing the habits that one has, and really being discerning about, am I operating as an integrated being? Anywhere I have obsessions or places where there's addictions or things like that, there's going to be places where my sensory capacity has become distorted. I've in effect got too much sensitivity in one place and not enough in another. There's an edge there
And that
between
can be in places that it may not be that easy to spot, and it's worth the focus. And also distraction comes into that
that's right,
that bubble as well, I guess.
Notice how attention moves.
Yeah.
Get skillful at being able to notice how attention and feeling moves. And once you develop some skills in that space, you'll find that it serves you in many, many aspects of life.
I can't stop smiling because everything you're speaking about, I've got this idea for a book, and everything you've just said is like exactly what I've written down that I want to have in the book. Although I've described it as, I'm using this term vibes or vibration, and this that's kind of the feeling I guess you have with people, and there's so much more to the idea of vibration. That's going to be the lens that I kind of share this through, but it's just making me really happy. It's almost like this, that the fact that you're going down this road with it and you're putting it in kind of your terms with this amount of kind of clarity and depth is really nice. And you're right about creativity. It is a muscle that, that needs working out and practice to develop this, bandwidth of imagination to be able to use in these scenarios. But yeah, I'm really enjoying everything that you're kind of going through with me, Forrest. This is like a nice sharing. I'm just trying to thinking maybe to change gears a little bit and take it in a different direction. But this is so powerful. Everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Glad to help.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just, I guess, there's this element of, it keeps coming back to, this element of moving into or following through with things. And maybe it's just that it seems to be a personal thing, but there seems to be something that's stuck in that area. So once the understanding is there, and once everything is felt, there's like this practising that takes place. And then there's all these other things that need to be incorporated, like this sense of patience, but also this sense of needing to move because of the way everything seems to be changing in the world and going. This idea of contribution, the importance of a meaningful contribution in a timely manner, but then also being kind of compassionate with ourselves and kind enough to kind of allow that process to happen organically. Because it seems as though when things are rushed or when choices are rushed, there may not be the optimal outcome. But then there's also this sense of like, if you stay in the space of making the choice for too long, there's something that's really draining and really like, there's something that's horrible about just living in that space without making the movement or finally coming to a decision. And there's this idea that I come to of like, as you walk, the path unfolds as well. So not needing to kind of be super, 100% about everything and kind of allowing things to develop. I'm just going to make sure this, the computer's just running low on battery. Give me one moment, but you're with me, yeah?
Yeah. I got your question. So one aspect of your question is, how do we gauge the appropriate timeliness, right? To not rush, but also not to procrastinate.
Exactly.
Right. And, that question about, first of all, I agree with you in the notion that there is a right timeliness. And we want that timeliness to be appropriate to the circumstance. You mentioned earlier that, some choices feel like they're more momentous, and yet every choice feels important. If I'm trying to choose, which school I'm going to, or which job I'm going to take, or which partner I'm going to have, then there's a real sense that these are really long-term choices, right? If I go to this college versus that one, it could have real significant long-term implications in terms of who I meet, what relationships and jobs and opportunities will open up to me, and my course of life will be genuinely different. Same for taking one job or another, or getting involved with one person or another. There's profound impacts that those choices have, and that's just speaking at a personal layer. Obviously, when we're talking about communities, what we invest in as a community, what we basically do as a nation and as a planet is profoundly important as far as our collective future is concerned. So for things that are deeply important, I think there is a kind of proportionality of wanting to explore more deeply, wanting to really think and feel and imagine different scenarios, and to do so in a way that is commensurate with the depth of the impact. If I'm just trying to figure out whether or not to have, a mochaccino or a pastry or something, then the scope of the impact of that choice is probably going to be, the next few hours. But if I'm basically looking to define the course of life, then I really want to spend some days or weeks thinking about that. And I say thinking, but I'm including the imagination of feeling and conversations with other people, collective sense-making process, research and exploration, the real test it all the way through with every facility that you have. Whereas, so how do we know? Well, one of them is the gauge of importance, higher impact choices, longer time, just quite frankly. then there is a sort of correction that we want to make for a kind of habitual bias that we all carry. And this is called the action bias, which is it's an evolutionary thing. When we're in the jungle, think caveman times, for example, and you hear something, a little bit over your shoulder and rustling in the bush. Your first response is probably going to be an adrenaline rush to basically run, or maybe to turn around and prepare to fight, because it could be a tiger. And if it's a tiger and you are appropriately prepared in a very quick way, you have a much improved chance of survival. Whereas if you just sort of passively think about it for a moment or two and say, well, maybe that's just a squirrel or something, and it is actually a tiger, then you don't get to live another day, right? So in this sense, the action bias of do something even if it's not necessarily appropriate, like it might only be a squirrel or a falling branch or something, like 99 times out of 100, but that one time that it was actually a tiger, you get to endure. So having an action bias is a thing that promoted our well-being, promoted our survival, even though it was wrong almost all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the modern world, we're not dealing with tigers so much. We're dealing with crucial chronic problems rather than acute emergency situations. A tiger is an acute situation. Basically, having adrenaline rush all the time, whether or not there's a tiger or not, means that my system is now going to be degraded because I'm no longer well adapted. There's an appropriateness to how we respond. If it's a technology issue, then making the first satisficing choice isn't going to be correct. What we really need is actually the best choice. So distinguishing which kind of scenario we're choosing into is important for how much of an action bias we want to correct for.
There seems to be this idea of kind of, what's the word? Like, I'm just going to describe it because I can't think of the word right now, but kind of like failing and then like just kind of fixing our mistakes as we fail and
right. Trial and error approach, what we call this safe to fail probes.
Yeah.
So this comes from some of the complexity work, the Cynefin framework, and Mr. Snowden, who did some, not the guy who is in Russia, but a researcher on complexity.
Because there can be a stunting process that takes place when there's like everything's too overwhelming and we don't move because and we kind of want to do something about that.
There's a lot of balances here, so I want to sort of outline the different ones, right? So for instance, if we become habitually disabled, right, everything we do we believe is going to cause problems, then there is an inhibition, right? So for instance, if I'm dealing with a situation that mistakes are allowable, then probably I don't need to figure everything out. I can try some things out and learn from those experiences and then do better, right? And so a satisficing approach may be actually just what exactly is needed. I might not be able to anticipate in advance how things are going to respond. A complicated world or complex situation, I may need to have some experimental back and forth to do the sense making necessary to come up with a good answer. Whereas on the other hand, if we're dealing with something like biotech or artificial intelligence or X-risk phenomena,
you want to get it right the first time.
Yeah, you have to, right? I mean, anything to do with nuclear weapons, for example, you really don't have the option of trial and error. You need to be certain that you just don't make mistakes or we're all gone, basically. So in this sense, the amount of process that I will engage in my choice is going to be very, very different depending upon whether or not, again, safe to fail probes are possible, whether or not there's experimentation possible. In other words, is it a thing where the first good solution is enough, or does it actually have to be the best solution?
Have you thought about in your time, sorry to slightly interrupt you, Forrest, but have you ever thought about, a framework for introducing this into the collective consciousness for like kind of helping enable people deeper to make choices like this or from these with these considerations? I know you're doing a lot of work in that area, and I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are in terms of kind of dusting the space with this kind of vibe. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm one person, and the social media world is very noisy and busy, and so I'm not necessarily going to be able to convince anybody that what I'm telling is important. But I think that to the degree that people discover it to be meaningful and worthwhile, they'll come back for more. I mean, that's mostly what I can offer. I can basically say, there are recordings such as the one that we're making right now. There are books that I'm writing. There are occasionally I get the opportunity to teach, and people are really paying attention. Um, and I just basically I do what I can.
Mm.
Um, there's been some situations where people have learned from what I've said and then re-represented the material. Um, at first I felt really good about that approach, but recently I've kind of felt it to be a sort of plagiarism of my person or identity. So I've shied away from that quite a
Mm.
bit now.
Mm.
But in effect, there's a sense here where even if we have really good plans and really good ideas and so on and so forth, that to some extent we're really looking at how do we improve the health of the community. Social media right now is a kind of aberration. It's a disablement of the health of the community. And so, on one hand, I can basically say that, and I can point out exactly what that means, and I can sort of describe why alternatives are needed, or what would be needed. But ultimately, it comes back down to, I can't really use social media to complain about social media and actually have that make sense. I mean, I can to some extent, but
Mm.
it's already a little bit convoluted because of the means ends sort of paradox. So in that sense, it's still an open question as to, can we help people to notice the degree to which they've been um, that their facilities and their sense making capacities, their place in the world has been uh, largely shifted by the very dynamics of how we interrelate with technology.
Yeah, there's almost like not even, come to think of it, like it doesn't need to be approached with force. It's almost like that idea of like, you know, just being present with someone that's going through suffering and, maybe laying some seeds to help them out, but they really need to be the ones that pick them up and come to you rather than kind of like forcing people or judging people or
Well, I
kind of,
can't force anybody to do anything. I mean, I can try, but ultimately that would be a futility.
it's just the wrong way to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's even like, even to think that, the way we see things or the way I see things is more significant than someone else's perspective. But it's also like it just seems to like everyone needs to step up into their own lives, and no one can do that for them. Um,
There's very much that approach. I mean, as I said, this is still an active inquiry. I'm myself learning better ways to think about this, even still, and I'm sure I will for the rest of my life. But at the moment, all I can really do is to write down what I can and speak where the opportunity seems to be, and hope for the best, I guess. But the notion here is that we can create some clarity about some of these, like the questions that you're asking are actually really good questions, and they're meaningful questions. And so when we're talking about how to make good choices or how to find the right balance between choosing too quickly out of a sense of reactiveness, right? Um, the way it's been described is choosing on the basis of the immediate situation rather than on the basis of what's important. But of course, there's also the distortion of getting hung up on the stymied by analysis paralysis, as somewhat also referred to. And so, what I'm basically trying to do is to just sort of outline the kinds of concepts that would help us to disentangle that,
mm-hmm.
to sort of know how to distinguish. So this is why I'm using the metaphors about why we have this bias, why it's a natural bias to have an action orientation, but how with technology we need to think about what is the best solution rather than just what's the first satisfying one. And then there's other dynamics that show up. For example, when we think about the kinds of questions that we're asking. So, for example, if I'm asking lots of how-to questions, that's again an action-oriented basis, which is fine. But sometimes I need to go deeper and I need to ask the why question, like, why are we doing this? Why do we need to respond at all? Or, and then somewhere along the way, we're going to go to an even deeper level. We're going to ask, what is the essence of what success is?
Yeah, I think that's a question that I've been exploring in my own life lately, and I think
Mhm.
it's a pretty. It seems like a very significant one. You know, what's my ambition, and why am I doing that? Why am I even going that direction? And it's almost seems to be something that needs to be revisited because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that changes over time. It's not something that seems like it's solid. And every time I revisit it, everything kind of spins out because it's like, what's even going on here? Like, what's happening right now, you know? And
Yeah.
then, like, everything is kind of, when seems to be navigating towards that, that point.
Well, this is very much connected to what we were just talking about between thinking and feeling, right? When we're
Yeah.
thinking, we're asking why type questions. Why did this happen? Why does that happen? What is the pattern and the shape of things? And it's like a 2-year-old, for example. A 2-year-old says, "Well, why is the sky blue?" And you can invoke responses in terms of photochemistry and quantum physics and things like that. But ultimately, they're going to ask, "Well, why that? Why quantum physics? Why does the Heisenberg uncertainty principle occur?" And somewhere along the way, a person's just going to say, "Well, I have no idea," right? But the notion here is that somewhere along the way, the why question gives way to a what question. I can't say why something's happened in terms of some intellectual pattern. I can only say what I know or what seems to be the case. What is the substrate out of which we even construct a why type question?
Mm.
So, metaphysics in this sense, and when we're talking about, you mentioned earlier that these questions have a kind of moving character. You know, who am I? What is here? What matters? These are all perennial questions. Every time I ask the question, who am I? I'm going to have a different answer. Who am I in this moment is going to be different than who I am tomorrow and who I was yesterday. And what's here? Well, there's an awful lot of change here. And the change is going to make here a different place tomorrow than it was yesterday.
Mm.
And so in effect, when we're getting into the notion of the nuances, when we're looking at what does it mean to be discerning, to really notice these changes in their infinitely varied details, that there's a sense of engagement in the here and now that allows us to actually respond from a centered place. If I if I have a really solid connection to who I am, and I've integrated my whole self. I've done the psychotherapy. I've in a sense integrated all the aspects of my personality into one organic whole. Then, first of all, when I respond, I can respond as a whole being, and I'll be more effective. But it's also the case that in the sense that I know myself fully, I know who I am, and when I respond from the place of who I am as a whole being, that response is going to be naturally integrated with the environment in a more comprehensive way than if I'm in doubt. I basically don't know who I am. So these meditation practices of essentially becoming more aware of oneself, become more and more aware of one's feelings, isn't some sort of narcissist thing. It's actually a sense of creating the capacity to be able to be fully present and to feel the time as to when is the right time to respond, to not react, but to act, right? And the reaction has a causal element, has a kind of unconsciousness, but the discernment creates a deeper consciousness, a deeper awareness of the flow, so that the moment in which you feel moved to act is much, much more likely to be the right moment in which to act, right? And again, this is a discerning thing. Judgment is going to have a reactiveness to it. It's going to have a kind of unconsciousness built in. But as I become more aware of, moving from the question of how to why to what, when I can live in the space of what is, both for myself and for the world, then I can have the impedance match between what is in myself and what is in the world actually be the best. And from that we can actually answer questions of who and when and where. And that's all there is to it, right? There's really only 6 questions: how, why, what. Those are the abstract questions. And then we have the embodied questions of who, when, and where. And there are only 6 kinds of questions. And so in effect, if we really get to the sense of having mind and body and, you know, the sort of heart and the gut integrated with our capacities, then we are able to have the who, the when, and the where be in balance between the what, the why, and the how. And that's the whole package. So in this particular sense, I think that you know, we as a culture have you know, we've become displaced. We've in effect traded a sort of hypernormal stimulus. You know, the feed of news articles that just scrolls past, and the whole psychodynamic of the slot machine mentality of, you know, if I do this, I'm going to get this reward token in the form of likes or followers or something like that. But all of that is pseudo action. It doesn't actually touch the real world. It's not going to, you know, make a new kind of you know, energy system or build a house or genuinely help another person move or grow a garden or, you know, cook dinner or anything like that. It's going to be you know, essentially the signaling of something rather than the actual being of it. And so in this sense, part of it is, you know, literally just getting out of our own way and engaging with the actual universe, the real physicality of being, rather than just the screen mediated versions thereof.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Do you have any books you can recommend me to read of yours that may, I don't know, you've written a few?
I've written a few. The one that is closest to what we're currently talking about is a book called The Effective Choice. So if you go to magic-flight.com, it's spelled exactly the way it would seem. You know, and you look for books, and you basically see the Effective Choice book. You can purchase it direct. We make those books. You know, we don't we set up our own printing shop, and we just did a run of making our own books. It was kind of fun.
Nice.
And you know, the topics that are in the Effective Choice are really interwoven through a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, I think we've kind of gone to a place that seems pretty meaningful to me, and yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's just I really appreciate it, and, you know, like I mentioned earlier, I appreciate the profound impact you've had on my life in it. Just, you know, in a way that, you know, it could seem so simple, but it's had all these like kind of deeper kind of effects. So thank you.
Well, you're most welcome. Thank you for reaching out. I mean, you know, the whole thing about you know, the intention that I put into putting that aphorism on the back of our products. You know, there's not very many companies that do something like that, but honestly, it was something that for me felt meaningful, in the hope that the experience that you've had as a result would be the thing that at least somebody had. So to hear and to know that that has helped you so much is actually quite affirming for me, because it's a realization of one of my hopes and dreams in putting that on the box in the first place. You know, there's a sense here by which it's a kind of closing of the loop. It's a realization of a hope and a dream that this would make a difference in the world, that somebody would, that hopefully many somebodies would benefit from that in a real and embodied way.
Yeah, I guess if you're coming from a real place and you have this intention that's pure, and you put something out there, you know, sometimes it's not so obvious what the effects are. And
well, it's certainly not been obvious until relatively recently. I mean, it's been a while that was, you know, we've been running that product for 10 years now. And you know, we even had contests at one point. Like we had I think it was in year 5 of the company or something. We basically said, here, we'll give you, some free product if you write an essay that really expresses the essence of what this aphorism is about. We got about 100 essays back. And when I read through them, I was actually really disappointed because 95% of them were,
Trying to get the
you know,
prize.
just clearly trying to get the prize, but not really understanding the essence of it. Your description today was more of what I was actually hoping for and looking for, to really know that it was a meaningful difference in a sense that went beyond just the words, but really went into the deep meditation about it and the feelings of it and the understanding that these were intended to genuinely shape how we have relationships, how we do community, how we navigate emotions and feelings and thoughts and choices in life, and the ways in which those practices of how we show up actually being improved.
Mm.
Connected to this, just as you asked about books and stuff like that, the effective choice would for sure be the central one. But on the website, I just literally put up this morning, I wasn't thinking about this conversation, but it's actually extremely timely because that the first part of we talked a little bit about is love is that which enables choice. The second line of love is always stronger than fear. Remember, I said it was a theorem,
Yes.
i.e., it's a known outcome based
Yep.
upon the dynamics of emotion. Well, I just posted on my website, mflb.com. You'll see a section at the top of the first page that says Tantra.
Okay.
And you go into that menu, and one of them is going to be an essay on the dynamics of emotion. I wrote it.
I'm going to enjoy reading that one.
Yeah. Well, 20 years ago, I wrote this essay about how emotions flow and transform. And there's really only a handful of emotions. There's love, fear, anger, frustration, and depression.
How do you come up with
Really,
this stuff? You're just sitting there thinking about this, or like what's?
well, as a philosopher, I started with this notion of metaphysics. So there's this deeper system of the relationship between the subjective and the objective, and it
Yeah.
informs a whole lot of other questions.
Yeah.
So in effect, what happened is that, as I'm exploring in my own life of how to work with these, firsthand dynamics that I'm experiencing, I'm sure everyone else
It's
is
nice
too.
that it comes from this place of experience. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it has to. I mean, philosophy is not just the love of wisdom, but to in a sense you have to embody that wisdom to some extent. It becomes a practical thing.
So you just kind of write out your experiences and you look for patterns and you see, you come up with this theory, and that would open up doors for, an
Well, I
extension
had a
of
lot
that.
of help. First of all, as a software engineer, I was able to do some things which previous philosophers I don't think ever really had the opportunity to even try. So there's the internet and there's all the research that people had done, and at the time that I was doing this work, it was really the perfect time. I mean, the internet had just started to come into being, but it had come from a very academic background, and most of the people that were involved were engineers and were scientists and mathematicians and very, very passionate about the quality of their work. And so in effect, the signal to noise ratio was tremendous. I mean, nowadays it's almost all
It's the other
noise.
way
If I try
around.
to do,
Yeah.
yeah. So in effect, the timing was very good, and I was able to develop tools and capacities with these newfangled machines, right? These computers that were just powerful enough to be able to actually do this sort of work, to really be able to look at a tremendous number of theories of philosophy, of science, of engineering and math, and to combine them with these sort of spiritual and mystical teachings. And so in effect, there was again, there's a whole story here about how the work was effectively done, but it wasn't just my own reflections on pattern and such like that. It was essentially the magnified result of centuries of people thinking about these topics. And
Through
so
the
when
through computers and through technology at that time.
well, it gave me the tools. It gave me some of the tools. There's two sets of tools. Well, actually three. There was the sort of objective computer science sort of tool set, and then there was a deep number of, frankly, for lack of a better word, esoteric practices that I had learned and trained in.
Yeah.
And between those was this deeply embodied sense of craftsmanship. My father was and still is a master craftsman. He's a woodworker. He has a shop and has been doing woodworking for all of my life. I mean, he
That's the
started when I
reason those
think I was.
boxes look so nice. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I was basically coming back to my roots, and that box is barely a demonstration of woodworking. It's a tiny thing, but honestly, um, it was nice to basically, after having so much of this ephemerality in the sense of a professional career as a software engineer, and then these super high abstractions and sort of esoteric disciplines, that to actually do something with your hands. I mean, there's a huge number of neural process that is in your hands. You have more sensitivity in your palms and fingers than almost your entire torso. So there's a sense here by which we literally become more intelligent by the capacity to build things, to work with clay or with wood or with stone or metal, and to know how nature moves shape and force and time. And so, in effect, if you become really skillful as a craftsman, then there is a kind of embodied intelligence that goes beyond just what is intellectually available in the
This is
computer
fascinating.
science world or in
Yeah.
the esoteric world. So in effect, I had these three tool sets, and in myself the capacity to combine them, and that led to things which were well, far more than the sum of the ingredients involved.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really cognizant of time here, Forrest, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. I would love to open a possible door to a future conversation at some point, whether that's 3 to 6 months time or even longer. I don't mind, but it would be nice to talk again.
It would be great.
And I'm very curious about the specifics on the software and the practices, but I guess we'll leave that for another time.
Well, how about 3 months? You reach out again, and ping me if you don't happen to get a response right away. I mean, I don't know what my future holds, but just keep reaching out until and try until you get an answer, basically. But I would suggest that it would be quite fun to meet with you again, and I have enjoyed the experience of talking with you quite a lot. So I would actually look forward to an occasion to do that again.
Fantastic. Well, I think we could probably leave it at that. I'm definitely going to check out this theory that you threw up this morning, though, and I'm going to point people in that direction because it seems like, yeah, I'm just curious to see what I find, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Well, explore what's on mflb.com. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. As I said, look at the dynamics of emotion. It's a kind of stiff, formally written paper, but there's a lot there that connects some of the dots on this.
mhm.
Again, there's a sort of tantra section that I'm developing, and there's a few other podcasts that I've done, that may be of interest to you if you dig around on the internet.
Yeah, will do. All right, Forrest, thank you so much. And yeah, I don't know how to. It's very hard to convey, how thankful I am, you know, over the screen. I'd love to just reach over and give you a big hug and just, I really appreciate it. And I guess, yeah, we'll see how things go, and I'll hit you up in a couple of months.
All right, sounds good. It was truly a pleasure. Hope
Thank
to
you
talk
so
to you again
much.
soon.
Have a good one.
Blessed be. Namaste.